Adam, I got to tell you, I had a couple weeks away, was down in Florida getting some sun. You know what? I'm a little injured this morning. I think I got some swimmer's ear from jumping around in the ocean and a little bit at the pool. I'm going to play through it. I
Mhm.
was questionable coming in, but listen, true warriors and true champions know that you got to come out and perform even on a Friday morning edition.
Yeah, yeah. Andrew Makowitz, warrior, I think is the way that usually goes. That's the way that I've heard it framed before. We come in on a Friday after Andy got some fun and sun with the family, well-deserved rest, as we say. And now it is, of course, we're in the off season. We're working towards OTAs. We're working towards learning some things about not just the returning players, the free agent signings, and then, of course, the rookie draft class as well. One of the little news and notes that came across the line too is, as seems to be the case, right? The Giants and the New England Patriots always have a connection through Bill Belichick, now through Joe Judge, and through yet another player. Adrian Colbert has been signed by the New York Football Giants this offseason. Safety, 27 years old. I mean, I think we all have a familiarity with him just from seeing him on the field for New England. He's been a contributor there. Surprise you at all, Andy, that the New York Football Giants, as we bring you back into the fold here for a second, I'll kick this guy out. And does it surprise you at all that the Giants brought in yet another safety in Adrian Colbert? Because you have McKinney from last year, you have Peppers, you have Logan Ryan. Do you feel like this is another crowded body in the room or veteran player that Judge wants to take a look at? We remember the rumors about McCourty possibly this offseason as well.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're at the time of year where you want to bring in as much competition as you possibly can into camp. And I think people had some massive overreactions. Oh, is this the end of Julian Love? Is Xavier McKinney not looking healthy? And like, we don't need to read too much into it. Think about this. You know, you have the 53-man roster, maybe 54, 55 with COVID, depending. They're almost doubling that in terms of the players and bodies that they're bringing into training camp. So when you think about the depth at the safety position, they could bring, 80% more into what the starting roster is going to be to actually bring in some competition. So, Adrian's another guy who, is kind of bounced around, familiar with the organization. I'm fine bringing him in. It's the same reason why I'm fine bringing in any of these players. Kelvin Benjamin is fine. Corey Clement is fine. Let's get a bunch of depth, maybe even veterans that have been around the league, to push some of these younger guys to make sure that they don't feel like their roster spots are secure.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you think about guys up to 90 players, in camp every single year for NFL teams. When you cut down to 53, 55, all of a sudden the market becomes flooded with literally hundreds of players become available over a stretch in the offseason. And it's interesting because a player that doesn't fit for the New York Football Giants could be a number 2 on a depth roster, right? Could be a depth piece somewhere else. I don't mean, number 2 wide receiver, but when you talk about your starting linebackers, hey, here's a guy that gets 30% of the reps, and the Giants are moving on because we have young rookies or young second-year players. Another team in a deep playoff run, championship mentality says, boy, adding a missing component like that is just the extra depth we'd like to have going to the regular season.
Yeah, and Adam, I think one of the other things that people should note about any of these signings that come after the draft or just around the draft in the final terms is basically, what does the actual contract look like that the Giants are signing them to? Like, what is it a lot of money up front? Is it what's the dead cap hit if the Giants release them? If there's no dead money for the Giants, it's like a free lotto ticket for them to bring them in, and it doesn't count against the cap. So, keep in mind, the types of players that require guaranteed money are the guys like Richard Sherman that are still sitting out there being like, I'm not taking a deal to just come into someone's training camp to be cut. Like, if you want me, you got to make sure that you guarantee me money to come in and that I'm going to be a starter on this team. And any of these other guys that are signing these contracts, these are just to see if they can make a roster. And if they do, that's when the contract kicks in. But if you see someone getting signed right now and there's no dead money, if they were to cut them, then that's kind of an indication of where they stack rank on this roster.
For sure, but I think it's good. And we said this before that last year the Giants were signing undrafted rookies to try to replenish the roster. Now it's about bringing in some veterans, taking a look at some guys, and helping, I think to your point, push some of these young players and make sure that you get the best out of the youth on the team over the course of a training camp and OTAs. We move over to some O-line chatter. Maybe Mad Hatter. I like rhyme schemes. I want people to know that up front. We said this, I think, last time that we were on one of the last episodes. People came out with the starting rosters. And there's a part of me that thinks, oh, well, if this is what you think the starting roster is going to be, I can understand why you think the Giants aren't going to be as good this year by, some metrics. Offensive line obviously was a huge topic coming into, through, and even after the draft. But there was one report where I think it may have been Bleacher Report that said predicting the Giants offensive line, it was starting for the entire team. When they got to offensive line, they have Nate Solder starting at left tackle, Andrew Thomas starting at right tackle, and Pert, essentially, as we would assume, being a backup swing tackle in the rotation. Lemieux at guard, by the way. They're still putting Gates in there. And I'm not sure if they said Hernandez was going to be at right guard or not. Bit of a mixed bag on that side. Just what's your general reaction to that? Because I'm not even going to go, I'm not attacking this from a Nate Solder standpoint. I'm just attacking it from a logic standpoint, I think.
Well, a lot to unpack here. I have said on this show before, when we were talking about what we do with the number 11 pick, if Rashawn Slater is there, if Penei Sewell falls to the Giants at 11, I could see a world where Andrew Thomas moves over to the right side. If you think Penei Sewell is the most generational left tackle, set it and forget it for 15 years, shows that in training camp, I would not be opposed to moving Andrew Thomas. What I am opposed to is moving Andrew Thomas for a guy that's been out of the league for over a year, who, when he was in the league playing for this team, did not perform very well for the Giants, has only gotten older since then, and had to take a pay cut just to be able to stay on the roster. And we want to put him in at left tackle over Andrew Thomas, who developed over the course of the season, looked better in the last 5 or 6 games, looked like he was getting his legs literally and figuratively, underneath him at that position. And so to me, this makes no sense if you go this route. The last thing I will say about why this is nonsensical is because you have Nate Solder. He's not the long-term option at left tackle. So you move him over there. You're changing Andrew Thomas, your first-round pick, all over the place. Okay, when Nate Solder performs mediocre or less than expected, are we going to shift Andrew Thomas back over there in the middle of the season? Are you planning on moving Matt Pert? And even if there's a world where Nate Solder is mediocre, just average left tackle, he's done after this year. What are we doing at left tackle again? To me, it just raises so many other questions and doesn't solve any of the problems that we really have.
Yeah. I could not frame it any better. And I think the idea that you maybe are going to be in a position where you're going to put stock into Matt Pert to replace Nate Solder maybe and keep Thomas at the right side, but it's like saying, well, if you feel good enough to put Matt Pert in at left tackle, then why isn't he starting at left tackle to begin with? Or why is it right tackle? Whatever it is, it just seems like to me, and we know we've been hard on, or at least I know I've been hard on Nate Solder over the course of the last couple of years, specifically with his play on the field. But I look at Nate Solder in the same way that we look at a Colbert, the same way that we look at a Kelvin Benjamin, the same way that we look at any of these veteran players we're bringing in this offseason. I look at him as a great veteran presence to help push the young players, be a source of information for them. And ultimately, though I think he'll make it through potentially and be on this roster, he's just a depth, hey, good to have in the locker room kind of guy.
See, Adam, I go a little bit differently because you know that I have not walked the plank as far down on Nate Solder as you have.
Don't right guard again with you?
Well, no, not necessarily. What I'm saying is, I said early on in the offseason when Nate Solder restructured, even before he restructured, I said there is a world where Nate Solder ends up being our right tackle starting the season, and I do think that is a possibility, and I'll tell you why. If you start Nate Solder and he's struggling a little bit, you can bring in Matt Pert, who kind of had that same role in last year's team. And you can just say, okay, listen, Nate, You're just going to be a plug in guy. When someone gets hurt, you're going to move across the line. That's kind of what you're going to do. If you start Matt Peart and he struggles early on, and you pull the trigger to move to Nate Solder in game 2 or game 3, like, is that the end of Matt Peart at that point? Like, it's easy to take the veteran who can show kind of the ropes, and then you can casually move him out when you think it's time and use Matt Peart as he grows. I don't think you can do it the other way. And so for that reason, I think there is a window where Solder can be the starter at right tackle in week 1.
No, listen, that sound logic to get to that place. I think for me, I would hope that Matt Peart clearly wins the job in camp and it eliminates that. And then Nate Solder is the backup swing tackle. And you're right. It's hard to go the other way with it and say, well, it wasn't going so good with Matt Peart, but we'll bring him back. Now we'll switch him. Don't worry. We have long-term. We think it's the same thing with Will Hernandez, right? He was in there. You gave him the chance. When it didn't work out, you went to Lemieux. We all feel like, hey, if you maybe get a chance to battle at right guard and find a new spot for yourself, that's great. But you lost the role last year. And barring a collapse from Lemieux, you would think that it's his job to lose at left guard. Likewise at right tackle, I'd like to see Matt Peart assert himself in camp enough where you say, hey, he showed it last year sharing time with Fleming. Now he's earned that role. Nate Solder, you're here to be the just in case. And by the way, if one of those two players were to get hurt, if one of them got to a place where that's it, it's over, there's no pressure on Nate Solder. Best case scenario, he comes in and he performs average and we go, oh my God, look, he, the savior that is Nate Solder. So who knows? Maybe he can write a bit of a story for himself. I'm sure that we're going to hear a lot from Thomas and from Peart throughout camp and throughout the season. What a resource Nate Solder has been, how much it's helped their game improve over the course of the year.
Keep in mind, Dave Gettleman, when everyone's like, where was the offensive tackle in round 1, 2, or 3? Like, where was the guard? Like, what's going on? And he's like, well, apparently you guys don't like our offensive linemen as much as we love them. And we're like, yeah, Dave, because they struggled last year. You didn't do anything to improve them. You got rid of our best guard. So yes, we may have some concerns. He's like, you don't see what we see. I'm like, well, Dave, guess what? We saw it for 16 games and it wasn't great. Now, what I will be saying is you can see Matt Peart and Will Hernandez working out in the offseason together. They are grinding. Matt Peart looks chiseled. Will Hernandez was putting up some reps that I didn't even know he had in him. And so they are pushing themselves to get better in the offseason. Maybe that's what Gettleman was alluding to. But sometimes when Gettleman gives those quotes where he's like, you guys don't see what we see. And it's like, yeah, we saw for 16 games. It was the 31st ranked offensive line in the league. Like, what else are we supposed to see?
And that's when you talk about, right, the Thomas, Lemieux, Gates, Hernandez, Peart lineup across the front, just youth all across the board. Even some chatter out of camp around the young man that we got out of, I think it was out of Florida, the young center. I want to make sure I get that right. Player that we brought in after the draft. Supposedly they like the idea of building him as a potential replacement for Nick Gates at center should they not be able to bring him back next year. That's for next year. Other information that I want to get into is, of course, the season. Listen, if you know me beyond the Giants podcast, you know that I also cover the Nets for Locked On Nets as we head towards the playoffs. Historic season for Kyrie Irving this past year, joining just the 9th player in history to join the 50-40-90 club. 50 from the field, 40 from beyond the arc, 90 from the free throw line. And it got me thinking, I mean, listen, that's the gold standard, right? But what is the 50-40-90 club for QBs? Because before I want to get into Daniel Jones and where we want to set our expectations for him and what expectations we set for him individually and how it correlates to team success. But if you had to come with the touchdown interception completion percentage ratio, what do you think would be that equivalent gold standard that we're talking about? This is something that historically has only been done, single digit times in the NBA. Where would you set that bar by NFL standards?
That's a great question. I mean, we're talking about gold standard, like you're basically a top 5 guy at your position in the league. I think, at minimum, you got to throw for 4,000 yards. I think touchdown to interception, I think you got to have a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. So maybe, let's say, 36 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. And I think if you could have a quarterback rating over 100, is that kind of what we're looking at, Adam?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid baseline, right? And then if you talked about like the elite of the elite, right? You might be saying 40 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and then completion percentage. Let's see, I think it's 72% or something, right? Those numbers that when a season like that comes up, add the yardage in, which I think is, fluctuates these days with the NFL and how open the offenses are. But by that standard, we'd all step back and go, my God, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, right? This was one of their historic seasons inside of their career. And that's what got me thinking about Daniel Jones, because what is the ideal version of our quarterback this year where his individual success equals team success? So I came up with this touchdown interception completion percentage model. And I just wondered if I threw out the idea of this player could go 35, 13, and 65%. Daniel Jones could go 30, 10, and 68%, or he could go 25, 8, and 70% completion. What to you inside of there? And listen, this is dartboard conversation here, but which one of those do you think correlates to the biggest success for the Giants this season?
Yeah, I mean that's a great multifaceted question, Adam. I like the way that you phrase this because there's a few things at play here. One, do we have a healthy Saquon Barkley in the backfield? Right, because if he is healthy and we have a little bit more of a balanced offense, then does Daniel Jones have to take as many shots down the field? Do we have to score in bunches? Is his completion percentage get a little bit lower? The second thing is our defense still a top 10 defense in the league? Because if they're going to keep us in games, do we need Daniel Jones to take chances down the field? We've talked ad nauseum about turnovers being the biggest issue with Daniel Jones. And if he can eliminate those turnovers, all the advanced metrics talk about his passes downfield are very accurate. His completion percentage for a rookie was better than Josh Allen's, was better than Sam Darnold's. Even in year 2, he was better than those. So when you think about it, I would kind of go with option B. The 30 and 10 is the one that I like, probably because I said the 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio was right where I wanted. And I think 30 touchdowns, especially with the extra game this year, would be a good stat line for Daniel Jones.
Yeah, and I think, I looked at you go to the lowest one, and because the completion percentage, lowest by, touchdown standards, but 25, 8, and 70, and you mentioned Saquon Barkley, the note that I had right next to it was breakout year for Saquon Barkley, return to form year for Saquon Barkley, where what you get to do as Daniel Jones is say, yes, I have all the weapons, I have everything that I want to do, but I get to be highly accurate. Right? I get to pick and choose my throws, work through my progressions, find the right read in every single set, because Saquon Barkley is the engine that's moving this offense up and down the field with consistency. That's exciting, but I don't know if we've seen plenty of teams that have running backs that go for big yardage every single week, and they don't necessarily win a lot of games. So to your point, the middle 30, 10, and 68, the completion percentage is high enough there where you feel like he's making the throws that you need to. The turnovers are low enough that you think when he's in the red zone, he's checking those boxes and getting touchdowns, not having turnovers that are costing us a 3-point game to become a 10-point game late in the sequences. The hard part for me is I want to go for the big numbers, right? But I don't think that the best version of Daniel Jones is a guy that throws. And listen, when you say 35, that's a big number. 35 and 13, like, hey, and I'm even using that 13, the turnover, not just interceptions, right? Turnover totals. Let's bring all those numbers down collectively. But I'd be hard pressed to think. It's almost funny too, because I'm creating a little bit, I think, of a difficult narrative. 65 completion percentage, but 35 touchdowns. It means that you're kind of muddling through in between the 20s, and then you're getting hyper accurate and successful in the red zone. That's great, but Daniel Jones has shown, right, he's still maybe coming out of that learning curve where you protect the ball more as you get closer to the red zone.
So Adam, I've been thinking long and hard about Daniel Jones and what he needs to be, or what is a good comp for him.
Sure.
This may sound a little bit far-fetched, but when we look at the stats and the breakdown of the stats, not that he needs to be this player, but he needs to be able to put this type of performance on the field.
Give me the numbers first of this player. Don't give me the name yet, right? Because this is how we end up having, you say the name, everyone's going to go crazy.
Okay, so if I told you that Daniel Jones would have 3,900 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, with a 67% completion percentage, how would you feel about that?
See that I mean, listen, that's not too far off, right? The 25,870 line. That's kind of in that wheelhouse there. To me, that's a little bit better than a game manager, right? Because he's mitigating some of those risks there of turnovers. I would be excited about that. In my heart, would I like it to be bigger and better? Sure, but that's a solid season with consistency where a quarterback is controlling and guiding his team on a week-to-week basis.
Well, so, okay, we're off to a good start. I feel like those numbers are top half of the league. If you look at it the way it is, the completion percentage is great. The yardage is great. If I told you that this particular player had 9 fumbles last year, the over under 9 fumbles, how would you feel in that regard?
Well, because then you're talking about having almost 20 total turnovers. So if there's a bonus stat that tells me rushing touchdowns or rushing yardage, maybe I take that into account. But 9 fumbles is a little dangerous for me. That's a lot. That's a fumble every other game, for my quarterback. And I'd like to see, just like you talked about the 3-to-1 ratio, I probably want to see a 3-to-1 ratio games to fumbles. So 17 games, I want to see those fumbles closer to 5 than 10.
That is absolutely fair. I think I'll pause here and ask if you have an idea of who this player is that I'm comparing Daniel Jones to.
God, how could that be?
For the listeners, we did not discuss who the player would be. I said I was going to do some comps and we were going to figure this out. So far you have a few key metrics and stats, and I feel like I've given you, interestingly enough, I've given you a comp that's kind of in the range of what you said you'd hope for Daniel Jones to be able to have. So we're circling the wagons. I'm just curious if you know who the player may be that I'm comparing him to.
Yeah, I'm running through names just to have them in front of me, feel like I have an opportunity. Like, because the first one that jumped to mind was like a Ryan Tannehill. It feels like that kind of stats that are maybe underwhelming game to game, but then by the end of the year, a guy like Jared Goff came to mind. Oh, you know what? I'll go young quarterback. I don't think this is right though. I think it's I don't think it is. I'm going to go young quarterback. I'm going to say Kyler Murray.
You would be correct.
Oh, really?
Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought it was going to be. I almost thought it was going to be Teddy Bridgewater for some reason, like lingering in my mind, and I couldn't. Oh wow! Hey, all right.
You pulled yourself from out of the depths there. You're going Ryan Tannehill. You're thinking Teddy Bridgewater. If we had some sound effects in the background, we would have some fireworks going off. So the correct answer is Kyler Murray. And obviously I buried one of the key stats, which is the rushing piece of things for Kyler Murray. And you actually alluded to that, Adam, with the fumbles. You're like, well, maybe if he's a guy that gets out there a little bit more and he's multifaceted. And the reason why he's a good comp is because Daniel Jones, while he is not as explosive and athletic as Kyler Murray, he does have top 5 to 7 quarterback ability in terms of athleticism to get out in the pocket and make plays with his legs. Kyler Murray had 800 rushing yards last year. He had 11 touchdowns rushing last year. So when you think about it, he was multifaceted and he had the dynamic of being both an accurate passer as well as a rusher that added 10 more touchdowns to his touchdown total. And so that's kind of where you take the tough fumbles into account. But kudos to you, Adam. What are your thoughts about the comp to Kyler Murray, as the player that is kind of like, if he could do that, we would sign up for it?
I'm still basking in my own glory. No, this actually is really good because I pulled it up while you were finishing some of those extra stats around him in terms of the yardage. I pulled up, right, QBR, 69, almost 70 QBR. Listen, that's 14th in the league. And we've kind of said this with consistency, right? Do we think that Daniel Jones can be the long-term franchise quarterback? Yes, we do. Do we think that he's going to go and become a top 5 quarterback in the NFL this year? Maybe not. Probably not. But if you can be top half of the league, if you can be closer to 10 than 20, I think that is the recipe for success. When we talk about where people have the Giants finishing, the over-under mark set for their win totals, all that stuff, it's all predicated on, we think that Daniel Jones is going to be, 20th in most categories and muddle his way through the season, and the Giants are going to lose some games because of him, and that's why they're going to finish 7-10. That's why they're going to finish maybe 8-9, right? But if you give me a Kyler Murray style stat line, and I'll even say rushing yards, listen, closer to 600 than 800, fine. But if you do that for me, then when we talked about all too early predictions, then 10 wins, yes, maybe 11 wins, right? Because that means that he's protecting the ball. It also means that he's being dynamic and making some extra plays outside the pocket with his legs at times. Yeah, I think that's a great comp. I think it's a great comp to head to the season and say, hey, this would be a nice standard to set. Now, and I'd probably say, I still would like less running because he's not Kyler Murray. So a little less rushing yards, a few less fumbles, and maybe a couple more passing touchdowns, right? If you can give me 28 touchdowns through the air, right, and 6 or 5 fumbles for our young QB, then I'm all on board. I would sign up for it right now.
I think the idea is also, and the reason why I use Kyler Murray, people might be like, well, he was the number 1 overall pick. Of course, like having a number 1 quarterback, if that's where he ends up, we'd be in great shape. But to your point, yeah, Kyler Murray was 14th in QBR. I'm not saying he needs to be Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers. I'm saying he needs to get us into the top half. It's the progression the defense has had. When they were terrible, all of a sudden they looked good, and last year they were unbelievable. It's like, start progressing and moving it along. And the perfect example is this. Daniel Jones is 20th in QBR. Kyler Murray's 14th. When you look at the players that are around Daniel Jones at where he's at, you're talking about Mitch Trubisky, who's now backing up Josh Allen. You have Ben Roethlisberger, who the team would have released if they had the opportunity to, but his cap hit was too much. And Jared Goff, who they got rid of and they traded away, and actually traded away first-round draft picks to get rid of Jared Goff. Those are the types of players that are sitting right behind Daniel Jones. That is a tough, Daniel Jones is in front of them, just full disclosure. When you look at Kyler Murray, the couple players behind him are Matt Stafford, Matt Ryan. The player that's right in front of him is Justin Herbert, and Deshaun Watson's right there. That is a different level of grouping, and it just feels like a different tier. And so if we can get Daniel Jones to move to that next tier, he doesn't have to be Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't have to be Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't even have to be Lamar Jackson. But if he can move into a top half quarterback of the league, look at Kyler Murray's comps as a way for him to get there. And with this offense and the weapons that we have returning and what we did in the draft and free agency with Kenny Golladay, there's no reason to think that Daniel Jones can't do it.
Absolutely phenomenal reference points there in and around 20 and in and around 14, right? Because when you say those guys towards those back end numbers, you go, I don't know if I want that to be my quarterback out there. And you mention the second group and you go, yeah, okay, here we go. I like what I'm seeing there. And that's the difference between this season for the Giants. And, listen, there's going to be a lot of things to get into. The receiving core is going to be new and dynamic. Saquon's going to be back. The running back group is going to be better even behind Saquon. And yet, we all know one of the most prevalent themes at the end of the day is going to be the play of our young franchise quarterback. The way that he goes this year is the way that the team goes and is the way that the franchise goes, by the way, because if it's a miss, then that means we rip this thing apart and we're all the way back to square one. If it's a hit, suddenly we can start talking about being a consistent playoff contender in the NFC East and maybe one of those dark horse threats. Remember, friends, once upon a time, a young plucky kid out of Ole Miss came into the room high in the draft class with a lot of expectations on him. Bit of a dark horse candidate. A couple of MVPs later, I think we're all pretty satisfied. You can follow us on social media at One Giant Podcast. Of course, download, rate, review, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating if you can, because it really helps us, of course, continue to build this little empire that we have here. And by the way, we've been trying to transition. We're transitioning onto a new platform. It has not been easy, so we're still getting episodes out on the old platform, but there was a little bit of a lull there over Andy's vacation that we kind of fought our way through. So thank you for bearing with us and continue to come back for more episodes. Big shout out to Ricardo over on YouTube for joining us live. We'll leave you with his thoughts. Daniel Jones has no more excuses. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and demand that you know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.
Hey.